Did your restrictions on protest create a tinderbox in the CBD last night that led to the very ugly scenes we're now seeing this morning?
No, that's not the case. I mean, New South Wales Police and the government did everything possible to avoid those clashes and that conflict on Sydney streets last night, including for the last week saying to organisers, can you please have the protest in Hyde Park and march down College Street, which was abjectly refused by the protest organisers. Most people dispersed after the protest had finished, but a small number were intent on having a clash with New South Wales Police, and that's exactly what happened.
But when you realised that people were not going to follow that direction, was it the right move to have additional police, to have barricades? Should that march just have been allowed to proceed? We didn't see these other scenes like this play out in other cities, for example.
Well, look, think about the question that you're asking. Should, once police realised that the protesters were going to ignore the New South Wales Supreme Court, a police direction and the government's legislation, they should have let them march? I mean, the answer to that is no. I mean, what we can reveal today that we couldn't talk about yesterday is that we had 7,000 Jewish mourners in the same city at the same time, at the same location just about, that New South Wales Police had to keep separate from the protesters. And what you didn't see on the clips yesterday evening and this morning, because it didn't happen, is that if those police lines were breached by the protesters, as difficult as those scenes are to watch this morning, it would have been far, far worse. New South Wales Police, the government's got a responsibility to keep the public safe. The circumstances were a tinderbox, but it has to be understood that everyone did, well, New South Wales Police and the government did what they could to avoid a confrontation that was rejected by the protest organisers.
Have you reviewed some of the vision being shared online, including that of a man who appears to have his hands up while he's being punched by at least one officer? Have you seen that vision?
Look, I've seen some of the vision, including that vision, and I think it's important people don't judge the full context of that interaction by that short clip. All of this will be investigated. The Assistant Commissioner, Peter McKenna, has said that very clearly. But New South Wales Police were charged multiple times by a group of protesters. They held the line because they had to hold the line. It was important that Sydney streets were not overwhelmed by protesters, and we couldn't have a choose-your-own-adventure situation where protesters and mourners clashed on Sydney streets. That would have been terrible for our state, even worse than the scenes that we saw yesterday evening.
There's another video of police appearing to pull back a group of men, Muslim worshippers who are on the ground. Was that appropriate?
Look, I mean, I think it's important to say that New South Wales Police would never have intended to cause offence to people who were praying yesterday evening or exercising their religion. I mean, they've got decades worth of cooperative relationships with the Islamic and the Arabic community.
I mean, that clearly does some harm.
Yeah, But Bridget, I think it's important that context is shown here and people understand that it was a riotous situation. New South Wales Police's lines had been repeatedly charged. They've given a lawful direction to the community to disperse. It had been largely ignored. Now, we don't want those scenes. It's the last thing we want and the last thing we need in Sydney. But New South Wales Police were in an incredibly difficult situation. Look, I hope we can bind up the wounds there. I'm not suggesting it's a perfect situation, but I also think New South Wales Police and the government were faced with a dynamic situation where people were attempting to breach police lines. And I think given the fact that we had a visiting head of state, 7,000 mourners, 5,000 protesters, it was a combustible situation that needed to be contained.
You know better than anyone, this is a time of intense community anguish. I think most Australians can understand that. But given that, was this the right time or the right call to have the Israeli president visit Australia?
Look, Bridget, we can't forget that it wasn't years ago, it wasn't a decade ago, literally a month and a half ago, Australia had its worst terrorism event. 15 Jews were mowed down because of their religion. And at the end of the day, the community, most of the community, I think, felt that if we can ease their suffering a little bit by showing some solidarity with their community, it's worth doing. Of course it would be worth doing. Now, look, we're not going to have a ubiquitous view from a city as big as Sydney with millions of people having different and diverse views. But what I'm hoping is that we can have calm and responsibility, and when there is disagreements, we don't do it with clashes and with violence. New South Wales Police offered a perfectly reasonable, proportional alternative for a march at Hyde Park down College Street. It was rejected by the protest organisers. Most people dispersed at the end of the protest, but a small number were intent on having a clash with police, and that's exactly what happened.
Have you got people within your own party, though, that take a different view, that this could have been handled differently? I mean, there were members of your own government that attended the protest, right?
Absolutely, we do. That's the truth. But we're resolute in relation to this. This was a difficult situation, a difficult time in Sydney and Australia. And at the end of the day, our responsibility is to keep the people of New South Wales safe. And what you didn't see on the footage last night, because it didn't happen, is protesters breaching police lines. My view is that would have been devastating for our state.
All right, Chris Minns, we appreciate your time. Thank you.